So we've been talking over the last several weeks about two books of the Bible, the two books of the Bible that are named after women, Ruth and Esther. We spent several weeks on the book of Ruth and talked about her humble walk before the Lord and called out the fact that in her humility, God blessed her and raised her in his time. Last week, Lee helped us with the transition from the book of Ruth to the book of Esther. And we're talking about Esther now, and we'll be for a few weeks looking at her walk and how God also raised her from very humble circumstances to allow her to be an incredible part of God's plan and God's working with his people. Just before we get too much into that, there are a couple of things I want to call out this morning. First of all, yesterday was Veterans Day, so I would be remiss, I think, if I didn't mention today just the appreciation that we hold for all of those who have served in our nation's armed services, and we thank you for your sacrifice, whether you've served or whether you are currently serving. And thank you for what you've done, and appreciate all that you've done for us, and understand that what we have today and what we're doing today would just simply not be possible without you and with what you've done. So thank you again for your service. We really, really appreciate that. Yes, sir. Yes, that's right. Also, November is National Foster Care and Adoption Month, and it's an awareness month where we're to be aware of both those who are involved and engaged in foster care and adoption, and also consider how we might help in those realms. And we may have more to say about that this month, but I wanted just to also lift up those who are involved in foster care and adoption. I know there are a number in our church here this morning who are engaged in that work and know that it is a work of God. Taking care of those and helping those who are in circumstances where they need that kind of help. And it's an amazing sacrifice, a tremendous effort. And I really appreciate you all, and know, hopefully from the bottom of my heart, that you know how I appreciate that. Thank you. So, as I said, we're going to be getting into the book of Esther this morning and looking at the life of Esther as we go through this. But this morning our focus is on, I guess, what the literature folk would call the antagonist, not the protagonist. The antagonist of the story of Esther is Haman. And we're going to be looking into him and his walk, what that was about, and really kind of focusing on the concept of arrogance, because I think we'll see that that's kind of at the root of who he was and the things that he did. I can't help but when I think about that, to go back to the sports weekend that we've had here recently. Saturday was just a crazy day in college football. A lot of upsets, a lot of challenges, a lot of folks that were headed for playoffs and that kind of a thing who aren't. Some who didn't expect to get there, got there yesterday or are on their way. And it's kind of what makes sports interesting. But it also reminds you of some of the fans. My favorite part of watching college football is just the crowd shots, right? Where you see, some fans who thought their team was going to do great, and they're getting just skunked on the field. And, they're sitting there with their hands on their head like, what just happened here? And other fans, and you gotta appreciate them. I mean, really, but their teams are getting blown out. They're terrible. They haven't hardly won a game, and the camera gets on them, and what do? They're wearing their gear. We're number one. Well, no, really, you're not. Not even close. I was at a Browns or an Indianapolis Colts game one time in Indianapolis. And it was the first game of the year, and they were playing the Cleveland Browns. Being from Ohio, I know the Browns have had some glory years. They've had some good times. Not really in recent memory. They've been pretty bad. And that particular year, I lived in Indianapolis, and the Colts weren't all that good either. It was definitely before the Peyton Manning years, and they were pretty terrible. But they played a game of the bottom dwellers, and Indianapolis ended up beating them on the first game of the year. Browns fans are notorious, though, for being loyal. You got to give that to them. You really do. They wear those dog hats that are just kind of, masks that are just kind of weird looking, and you wonder why any grown man would be in public with that. They drink more than, I just can't, you can't imagine the amount of alcohol that's consumed at their games. This was in Indianapolis, and Indianapolis is more of a polite cultural kind of a game. You know, it's where the polite people come down and they gather, and they're polite conversations, and they're nice to people, and they let you, get in line in front of them in the bathroom and that kind of a thing. Not so at Cleveland, and it's definitely a different world. Won't get into it too much, but needless to say, after the game, the Cleveland fans, who had undoubtedly taken part in that tradition of drinking too much, were walking down the road. Now again, they're a bottom-dwelling team, and their team had just lost the first game of the year. And they're chanting, walking down the street, Browns are number one, Browns are number one. And you got to give that to them, right? An Indianapolis fan finally yelled across the street and said, I think Browns are 0-1, which is what they were at that point. Thank you. That was awesome. But no, it's funny because, it's just so obviously not true what they're saying, and yet, boy, you just got, their hearts are in it, right? They're rooting for everything they're worth. While the rest of us more realists are going, I'm never going to root for them again. You want to root for the ones who are winning. And that's kind of the way it goes. More annoying, though, in my opinion, maybe in yours, you can call it as you see it, are the fans sometimes, not all of them, of teams who win all the time. All right? So you look at a team, well, in the professional ranks, it'd be like the New England Patriots. And I apologize if we have Patriots fans in the house. But again, a lot of times, their team is always in the playoffs, at least in recent memory, always vying for the Super Bowl, won last year on a come-from-behind victory, and again, they're gloating, right? Their team's always number one, and rather than just be happy that their team does well, they want to get everybody else too, right? It's not good enough for them to just be happy. They want everyone else to be unhappy, and then they're happy, right? If I can make everyone else, if I can tell everyone else how horrible and worthless their team is in comparison to mine, then I'm good. It comes across, in my opinion, as arrogance. It does, and none of us like arrogance. We don't like to be the recipients of it. We don't like it when it comes our way, when someone who thinks that they're better than us in one way, shape, or form, and when it comes to some of my NFL teams, they would certainly be true that their team is probably better at any given time than the teams I typically root for. But they want to make me believe, they want that to mean that they're better than I am, that what they like is better than I am, is better than what I like. And that never looks good. It's one thing in sports, though. It is. I mean, you kind of get it in sports. Sports is kind of a fantasy world in and of itself, and we can kind of look at that and laugh a little bit. Some take it more seriously than others, but we can kind of look at that. But when arrogance translates into real life, then you start to see some real problems emerge. In fact, Scripture, as Robin read for us, the Scripture that looks at arrogance, or how God tells us how God looks at arrogance in that particular passage, shows us that arrogance is completely unacceptable in the eyes of God. And it's not a part of, in any way, shape, or form of the Christian walk. People who live in arrogance tend to make qualitative comparisons or judgments that demean and hurt others, put other people down, and they do so intentionally. They dehumanize others and excuse violence, rudeness, prejudice, and bigotry. Again, we've seen it take place. We've seen those kinds of things happen when it's out there, and it's ugly every time we see it. They extend division, antipathy, and promote polarization. A prideful way of life, an arrogant way of life, the Bible sometimes calls it haughty eyes that look down on others, is never acceptable in God's eyes. Never. And I don't use the words always and never very often. But I can't find a single incident in Scripture where somebody is arrogant or haughty and God says, oh, that's good. In fact, he's always condemning it. He always wants us to look at people with a different set of eyes. And then as Jesus comes to earth, the only person who's ever lived that might have some reason to be arrogant and haughty, he comes to earth as a servant. He gets beneath people. He lifts those who are downtrodden, those who are sick, and those who aren't well. And he says, you people are prized. You're wonderful. You're awesome. Jesus refused arrogance. The Bible gives us a number of examples, a number of great examples of what arrogance gone awry looks like. Arrogance gone to an extreme. And Haman in the book of Esther is one of those examples. Haman he's a noble in King Xerxes' court. So he's worked his way up to a very high position in the kingdom. And at the beginning of chapter 3, Haman is promoted. He's told that not only will he be a noble, but he's going to be a noble above nobles. Look at the first verse of chapter 3 in the book of Esther. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him the seat of honor, higher than all of the other nobles. In verse 2, the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down to him and paid honor to Haman. So Haman has this high position. He's an important guy, and he's made more important. We're not told why the king wanted to elevate him, but he must have done something noteworthy, something of importance, because the king wanted to step him up. He called him out, not unlike it was done for Daniel, who served well before the time of Haman. But Daniel was also lifted up to a similar position. He was a noble who was put in charge of the other nobles. And yet Haman was very different. And it's interesting to look at the roots of where Haman came from. He is called the Agagite, or Agagite, however that's pronounced in the original language. But the root of that is Agag, and does that put you in the mind of anyone? You remember a character in the Bible named Agag? Yeah, he was a king who was an enemy of Israel, and he was a king over the people called the Amalekites. Now, Israel has a long history with the Amalekites. When Israel is marching out of Egypt, heading for the promised land, their first conflict, their first war, so to speak, is with the Amalekites. And we get the sense that the Amalekites see the Israelites wandering in the desert. They look vulnerable. They look like someone to attack for no other reason than just to steal their stuff. The Amalekites decide to attack this band, this marauding group of Israelites, and that's exactly what happens. You remember the Bible story. It's the one where Joshua takes some of the Israelite men, the fighting men, out to war against the Amalekites, and Moses holds the rod of the Lord, he calls it, the staff of the Lord, up, and when he holds the staff up, the Israelites are winning. But when his arm gets tired and he lets the staff down, the Amalekites are winning. And so Moses' people, those who are around him, start to realize, hey, when his hand's down, things don't go well. And so they start to prop him up. They put a stone under one arm. They get under him and hold both arms up so that his arms never grow tired. And in that action, in what was taking place there, the Lord was showing them, I'm going to fight for you. And indeed he did. And he defeated the Amalekites. What's interesting, and this is in Exodus 17, then the Lord said to Moses, this is after that took place, write this on a scroll, something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. And he says later on in another passage, the Lord, not Israel, the Lord will always be at war with the Amalekites. So God's pretty unappreciative of what's happened there, of what the Amalekites did to Israel in that situation. And again and again and again he shows it. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, Saul is told, I want you to go and completely blot out the Amalekites. Saul being Saul, arrogance was one of his problems, went out. Did he do what God said? Only partly, right? He defeated the Amalekites, took the king, took some of their stuff, but didn't blot them out entirely. In fact, the king that Saul took and was going to bring in to kind of put on public display was named Agag, the ancestor of Haman. And so you can see, and the author of Esther intentionally points out the tension between the house of Israel and the house of Amalek. That there's a disconnect, there's even a hatred, a cultural, a rooted in ethnic ethnic bias, a hatred that between those two peoples that continues. And yet it's this Haman, this Amalekite, who gets lifted up and elevated in Persia, in the region where King Xerxes was the ruler. This doesn't settle well with the Jews of the area, and especially one Jew, the Jew named Mordecai. Lee introduced him a little bit last week as we talk about, he was Esther's uncle, and he had followed Esther into the capital city and camped outside the gate where he could talk to folks who knew her and get reports on how she's doing. Get the sense that he's her greatest cheerleader, and he wants to stay by her side, and he wants to help out. At the end of chapter 1, and we'll come back to this later, but at the end of chapter 2, he overhears a plot to assassinate Xerxes. And he tells somebody about it. And because of that, those who plotted are put to death. They're executed for plotting against the king. And it's written down that Mordecai was the guy that turned him in. And so Mordecai has that going for him. He's a Jewish man. He has that going for him. But when Haman is elevated, this Amalekite is elevated to the position in which he was elevated, Mordecai couldn't stomach that. And so when Haman would come out of the palace and all of the king's officials would bow down to him, Mordecai wouldn't. Now, our Bible stories sometimes hedge a little bit in Mordecai's favor, something that may not have been. If you remember the story you were told in Bible class, Mordecai didn't bow down to Haman because the Jews didn't bow to anyone except God. And that's not exactly true, is it? The Jews bowed before kings and other nobles and officials. There was nothing in their law that prevented them from bowing down to political figures, because it was the common courtesy of the day to pay respect to those who were in authority. They were forbidden to bow down to other gods, right? They couldn't worship other gods. That was forbidden for them. But to bow down to a king, we have it recorded, they did that. And so it wasn't that he was doing that out of respect for God. We get the sense he was probably doing that because he knew that Haman was an Amalekite. And he wasn't going to bow down before an Amalekite. There's an ethnic tension that's thick here as it takes place. The king's officials go to Mordecai and say, listen, the king's commanded that everybody bow down to him. Why aren't you doing that? And we're not told what Mordecai says. We're just shown that he continues to refuse. I ain't bowing down to him. And so finally they go to Haman himself and say, listen, this Jewish guy says he's not gonna bow down to you. Haman comes out, and sure enough, there stands Mordecai. Not going to bow down to you. And the Bible says, and it doesn't use these terms, but you get this sense that Haman flips out, right? He is not happy about that. He is, the Bible says, enraged that Mordecai will not bow down to him. Now, at this point in time, because of Haman's position, it would have been a very easy thing for him to have said, he wouldn't have even needed the king's permission, for him to have said, Mordecai dies, and it would have happened instantly. That would have taken place immediately. He could have said that without trial, without anything. He had that position. But Haman begins to think, and again, this is where we start to see the arrogance come out. You know, I can actually use this for more benefit than I thought. Why kill one Jew when you can kill all Jews? So he makes up his mind that he's going to go and present this idea to the king, although the idea he presents isn't exactly the way what he intended to do. He goes in, and you can read it in chapter 3, and says, King, there's a people mixed within your people, some of the people that are captive, who don't listen to you and don't obey you. They have traditions that aren't like our traditions. They're different, and they just don't listen to what you have to say. And I think they need to go away. Can I have your permission to take care of that problem? And he offers to give the king an extreme amount of money for letting him do that. And the king says, listen, just keep your money. I'll trust you. And go ahead. You can take care of the people. That's all right. Well, what Haman did, first of all, is he made it sound like, he didn't tell the king who it was. And he made it sound like it was a handful of people. When actually it was tens of thousands or maybe even more of people that would be killed, annihilated because of Haman's command. But the king gives him a signet ring, allows him to write the edict, the the proclamation in the king's name. In other words, it's not Haman commands this, it's the king commands this. And he commanded that all of the Jews in a certain month, in fact, the Bible says that he cast lots, or he cast pur, P-U-R, and it's why the Jewish holiday is called Purim, is named after that, because the time that they were to die was cast in lots, and the lot landed on the month that it did. And it was around the time, interestingly enough, of the Jewish Passover. So the very holiday that commemorated the fact that God saved them and brought them out of the promised land was going to be the same month in Haman's plan. That would have been the month that they were annihilated. Those who lived in Persia would have been annihilated. Interesting, isn't it? How fate was going to play. You can imagine how the Jews handled this. And we're going to talk a little bit more about their response next week. How the Jews handled this proclamation that was going out. Every Jew, young, old, male, female, adults, and children were to be killed. Great plan Haman had in mind. He was going to take care not only of his enemy Mordecai, but of the Amalekite enemy Israel. And he was going to do it with the pen of the king of Persia. At the end of chapter 3, there's an interesting statement. The author gives an interesting statement saying the people of Susa, which was the capital city, were bewildered. Why would the king, what did they do to deserve such a fate as this? They weren't sure what was going on. And then at the end of the chapter, it also says that the king and Haman sat down and had a drink together. And if you read the commentary, it says the next time they have a drink together, things aren't going to go so well for Haman. But that's kind of foreshadowing. That's looking ahead. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I want us to think just a minute of what brings Haman to this point. Again, the fact that he is vain, the fact that he cannot stomach someone who won't bow down to him, the fact that he was that kind of ruler shows that he was an arrogant and a vain man. And it stands out in this particular passage. His arrogance leads him into thoughts that would lead him to genocide. Listen, this isn't the first person to have conceived of genocide, and it's not the last person, as we know, as we look in history and we can see what's taken place since then. We know he's not the last person to conceive of that, or to think about what that looks like, and try to carry out plans that take out an entire nation of people. In fact, that same nation, the Jews, have had a number of plots that have been hatched over time, most recently in recent memory with Germany in the time of World War II. The plan was kill them and kill them all. What leads one to that? And I believe the answer is arrogance. That arrogance is the first step in that direction. Arrogance, the idea that I am better than others, and some because of their ethnicity, because of their race, because of whatever group they're with, because of what I perceive to be their low intelligence or whatever it is, I am better than they are. And when you start to play that better than game, things get dangerous, at least when it comes to your relationship with God. And I think that we can point that out in a number of different ways. When people are arrogant, when their arrogance is assaulted, when someone questions their belief that they are better than, you start to see the sin of arrogance roll out. See, the sin of arrogance isn't just in thinking that you're better than others. It's how you enforce that. When you start to think you're better than others at whatever it might be, and someone challenges that, then it starts to come out in your words. Well, how dare they fill in the blank? Well, they're just fill in the blank. Well, they always fill in the blank. And we start to see that better than game being played, and played in a way that I believe Scripture says is sinful. God does not tolerate arrogance, and he calls it out when he sees it. Think of Bible characters like Saul. He was the king of the Jews, but God showed him his arrogance. You remember the Bible character that David had an altercation with, a Bible character named Nabal, whose very name means fool. You remember his arrogance and his refusal to help David, almost to his detriment. and in doing so, he shows his arrogance. How about Naaman? You remember that story? Well, I'm not going to dip in the River Jordan. It's dirty. Why don't I just go to my own land and dip in one of those rivers? And somebody has to remind him, listen, if you want to be cured, you've been told to dip in the Jordan. You better do what's said. And you see his arrogance. How about the arrogance of the Pharisees? Jesus calls that out regularly about how they consider themselves better than others. And yet, that's not what they are. He calls them whitewashed tombs. On the outside, you look good, but the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. Other characters as well. Herod, he died for his arrogance. He was one of the Herods. The Herod we see in the book of Acts is he dies. It says that God struck him down. And again, it's because of his arrogance. He was being called a god, and God struck him down for not paying homage or honor to his God. God calls out arrogance when he sees it. I think it's interesting to go to Ezekiel chapter 16. Something there that's very surprising. You might be surprised by it. In Ezekiel chapter 16, God is calling out the sin of Israel, but he's comparing it to the sin of another people. He said, now in verse 49 of chapter 16 of Ezekiel, now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. Again, we hear the word Sodom and we think we know what that sin was, right? We see a kind of immorality there that's rarely called out in Scripture. It's so foul that it's tough to read in kids' classes and that kind of a thing. It's sexually oriented. And it's something that we can see that their culture had degenerated in that way to such a place that it's shocking even to people who live in our fairly open times. But that wasn't her sin, at least not the one that's called out here. He says, now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore, I did away with them as you have seen. I find it interesting what is omitted in that as much as I do what is listed. Her sin wasn't what was obvious in the book of Genesis as Lot and his family was there. Her sin, as God called it out, is arrogance. She was better than. She looked down on others, and because she looked down on others, it gives us an indication as to why the men who went into that city were treated the way they were. It wasn't about pleasure, it was about power. We're better than you. And that's what was going on there. The sin of Sodom was arrogance. And again, it's not one we want to get anywhere near. It's not one that we want to be anything a part of. And in Isaiah chapter 3, if you'll get to that next slide, Isaiah chapter 13, verse 11. He says, I will punish the world for its evil, the wicked for their sins. I'll put an end to the arrogance of the haughty and will humble the pride of the ruthless. Again, God showing his distaste, his disdain for those who are arrogant, for those who are uppity, for those who don't think or aren't concerned with the less fortunate, but simply want to think of themselves, want to lift themselves up. I hope that we can see in this that the view of God for arrogance is not one that's at all positive. In fact, I think he wouldn't be offended at all for us to look at arrogance as pure evil. Something that is as opposed to who God is and what he wants us to be as anything else we could label or name. Arrogance is wicked. It's wickedness. I think as we read that, and as I read that anyway, maybe you have a similar reaction or response. As I read that, I think, well, man, where in my life might arrogance rise up? Obviously, I'm not going to seek to be arrogant, and I don't think anybody does that. I don't think anyone goes through life saying, hey, what are you going to be when you grow up? And you say, I think I'll be arrogant. You don't see people doing that. In fact, we use it as a condescending label when we refer to others as that. But the fact is that kind of a thing is one of those sins that creep in a gradual kind of way. And before we realize it, We're repeating the sin of Haman over and over and over again. So think with me a minute about your life. Where does the sin of arrogance creep in with you? Where do you think you might tend to play the I'm just a little better than game? Number of different places I think that it can creep in unaware, where we're unaware. One of those places is professionally, or maybe even if you're in college, and in college that you can see a similar kind of thing happening. Somebody has said before that if you want to know somebody's true character, look at how they treat people who are beneath them. Either people who are in charge in a work setting, or maybe upperclassmen in a college setting or a high school setting. How do they treat those who are beneath them? You know, at Harding, we had these social clubs, and when you were a freshman, you typically pledged or gave an indication that you wanted to be a part of this social club. And then we went through a process that's called a number of things. We called it well, I don't even remember what we called it. I went through it once and didn't care much for it. But it's a period where you kind of treat people rather harshly. I think now it's maybe called Rough Week, but again, that wasn't what we called it. But it was rough because you were treated rather harshly. And during that week, the people that you were most afraid of, the people who were the harshest and the most difficult to deal with, was always the sophomores. Why was that? They had just been through it last year. And you can see when they get through it, they're turning around and say, ooh, I can't wait to do that. All right? And that's the way it was. And that in those situations, and you didn't like to have to face that. It was a rough initiation. That was the word. Why do those words just leave you sometimes? But that go through that period of initiation, it was tough. But then you get through it, and now you're all of a sudden you have the power. You're the big man or the big woman, and you get to tell them what to do. Arrogance can sneak in like that. When you're given that promotion at work, and all of a sudden those who have been persecuting you, now you get to turn around and go, well, guess what you're going to do, right? And again, that has a tendency to creep in that situation. What does our Christian walk determine in terms of how we treat people at work, particularly those who are underneath us, who are beneath us? How do we treat them? What does how we've been treated as Christians, how we've been treated by God and by Jesus as he comes to earth, what does that tell us? How does that inform us as to how we treat those who are below us? Again, has a lot to say about character. And in some folks, arrogance can creep in there. Well, I'm just a little bit better than you. I have a higher pay grade. I have more seniority. I'm in a higher position, so you will do what I say. And when that kind of thing creeps in, again, it can move to different areas. How about in dealings with, in racial and ethnic dealings? In our country, we see a lot of tension come forward along racial and ethnic lines. We see that kind of thing played out on our television sets and in the news pretty frequently. And again, I think we have to back that up to where am I when it comes to that? What kind of things do I talk about other groups when they can't hear me? What is my attitude towards them, even when they're not around? How do I act towards people who are different than me? Maybe we see it nowhere these days more prominently than we see it in the political realms. My viewpoint is the right viewpoint. Everybody else's viewpoint is, can you say the word? Stupid is the word I was thinking of, right? Wrong is a little too nice, right? Because we tend to look at those who see whether you're a conservative and they're liberal, or you're liberal and they're conservative, it's not just wrong, right? There's something wrong with how they're thinking. And so they must not be as smart as I am. And so they're stupid. That was a bad word in my house. We didn't let the kids use that word, and when I slipped up and used it, they would go and say, Daddy said the S word. I'm going, oh, please, be specific about which. Yeah, some of you will get that this afternoon. But again, the idea is looking down on others. Looking down on others. It's arrogance. And in those political realms, again, you may feel like you're right, but how do you treat those who are different than you? Man, we can take it a step further, can't we? Into the spiritual realm. May feel like you're right doctrinally and theologically, but how do you treat people different than you? I won't suggest here that we need to change anything about what we think in terms of what's right, how we interpret Scripture, how we see God and how we see Jesus, about the right way to come to him. I don't know that we need to change any of that, but could it be that arrogance could creep in terms of how we think about others who see things differently? Absolutely. Absolutely it can. And arrogance in that place, arrogance in that category is just as wrong as arrogance anywhere else. When we look down on others because they see things differently than we do, we lose any opportunity to bring them closer to Christ. If they know, if they feel or they sense an arrogance towards us, we're going to lose all manner of opportunities to build relationships that can help them to be more godly. And when you're rubbing elbows with them, it may even help you to see things a little differently as God directs you. Heard a preacher one time stand before a group and talk about people who saw things differently than he did. And he said, if they would just read their Bibles, over and over again, he said that. Well, I disagreed with about 2/3 of what he said. And so I felt like he was talking to me. And I've read the Bible a couple times. And it was offensive the way he was saying it. If they would just read, in other words, if we read the Bible deep enough, if we read it the way we should, then obviously we would come to the same conclusions that he came to. And so if we just read our Bibles. And it may be that there were those in the audience that needed to engage in a more in-depth and a more well-guided study of Scripture. I'm not going to deny that. But I guarantee you they weren't going to get there with him saying that. There was a better way for him to bring that out. There was a better way for him to draw people into a deeper study of Scripture rather than offend them to the point that they want to try to make a change. How does that happen? Now, we need to think about arrogance. We need to think about how we see those around, the world around us. We need to never be involved in playing the better than game. We need to always be involved in playing the game of how can I lift you? How can I lift others? Let's look at that last slide. I think it's the passage that I had Robin read. I just kind of want to revisit it as we close this morning. He says, a person may think their own ways are right, but the Lord weighs the heart, how we think. To do what is right or just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Haughty eyes and a proud heart, the unplowed field of the wicked, produce sin. Now, I want to close with that because that struck me. Haughty eyes and a proud heart are just sinful, but they actually produce sin. Think about the metaphor that he uses are the unplowed field of the wicked. I love the metaphor. It's fantastic metaphor. Think about what that means. What's an unplowed field? Right? It's a field where you can grow what you want, right? It's a field where you can plant what you want to plant. And if you're wicked, what's going to get planted there is wickedness. Pride and haughtiness, the better than game, is wickedness. And it's only going to seed wickedness. It's only going to produce more wickedness. How does Haman get to the place to where he thinks killing all the Jews is the right way to go? Arrogance. Pride. It's the start. It's where he started going down the path towards that kind of sin, toward that kind of sick thought and behavior. We may never commit the sin of Haman. Certainly hope that none of us would ever do that. But when we condemn or put down or belittle broad swaths of the culture of which we're a part because they see things or do things differently or they appear differently than we do, we're doing some similar things there. And we see in this situation that God will not tolerate any arrogance in the life of someone who claims to be a follower of his. If we're arrogant, if it's about us, if it's about being better than, looking better than, being smarter than, doing things better than others, rather than lifting and encouraging them in the right direction, then it's arrogance and it's sin. And it's not just a polite sin. The way God speaks about it, he puts it in a list of sins that are sins that will take people to hell. And it's why I think we need to be very concerned about it. We need to look at our lives and see, where in my life might I be arrogant? Oh, maybe I'm not to where Haman is, but back it up. He wasn't always there either. Have I started down that road? What are my thoughts towards those who see things differently or do things differently or look differently than I do? Am I someone who's lifting them up and encouraging those around me to be better, to be more like God? Or am I putting them down? Am I saying that my way, my thinking, my looks, my people, my whatever are just a little bit better than yours? If we're doing that, we got to back that ship up. That's something that we need to be good at, getting beneath people, getting under them and letting them see God shining through us, God loving through us, God giving through us, tolerating where we see them being weak, and lifting them where we see them falling. I don't know where you are on that, but I'm wrestling with that in my own life. It's something that I'm striving for, struggling with, trying to see. And so if you find it this morning that you're struggling with it, join the party. Me too. But let's do better. Let's move away from Haman. Let's be more of what God wants us to be. Let's walk humbly as Jesus did. And be a people that draws others to him, striving to share the good news with them so that they'll come to be a part of what he is. Have you heard the good news? Do you know that this Jesus who shared a throne room with God saw fit one day, because of our situation, because of the fact that we could never be good enough on our own to deserve heaven, he said, I'll go. And he made himself taking on the form of a man. Not a king or a royal guy, not an arrogant person, but the most humble of humbles. He became a servant, and he served us. He served us to the point to where he gave his life on the cross, because he knew that that would take care of the sins that we've committed. It would make it so that we could be in heaven with him one day. Couldn't do it on our own, but he did it for us. That's the good news, that you have that open to you, that the gospel is that because of Jesus, because of his humility, because of his walk before us, because of his tremendous love for us, gave himself to die so that you and I could be in heaven with him. He didn't change us by demand. He didn't change us by arrogantly asserting that, hey, you need to be like I am. He gave his life in sacrifice so that our wrongs would never get in the way of us being in heaven with him. And then wants us to change out of gratitude because we appreciate what he's done. We see it. We enter that kingdom, and we serve him willingly because that's what we want to do. This morning, if you've not taken a step into his kingdom, the first step is to understand and believe, know what he's done for you. And then to confess your wrongs, put those things out there and say, I'm going to turn away from them. I'm going to be what he wants me to be. Be baptized into his name, having your sins washed away, and then living a life that follows him step for step. If you want to start that this morning, we'd love to join you in that. If there's some issue in your life that you'd like for us to pray with you over, we'd love to do that. There are going to be some folks standing around the auditorium in the back, maybe in the lobby, where if you want to just pray with someone, we'd love to pray with you this morning. If it's a concern for you or your family, if it's a concern for someone that you know, we just want to pray with you about those things and pray that God would attend to that God will be with you in that. The content of those prayers, by the way, will not be shared unless you specifically ask them to be. It's confidential, just between you and the person that you're praying with, unless you say otherwise. Whatever your needs are this morning, we invite you to come, to join us in this walk. We're not perfect. We're not going to be perfect, but we're heading that way. Join us in this walk with God, not arrogantly but humbly, walking behind our Master, following him every step of the way. Whatever your needs are, let us know this morning. We're going to stand to sing this song to encourage you.
The splendor of the King, clothed in majesty, let all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God, sing with me, how